Welcome, readers, to a special edition of Lead on Read. In this series, we bring you real conversations with educators, researchers, and thought leaders shaping the future of child development and education. I'm your host, Jamie Williamson, head of school at the Windward School and executive director at the Windward Institute. And today, I'm actually really excited to sit down with two incredible folks. One is Robert Carroll, who's an assemblyman over in Brooklyn, who is one of our alums, actually, and an incredible advocate for kids and families legislatively in the community. And the other is Dr. Meisha Porter, who is former chancellor of the DOE and has been an incredible advocate in this space as well. And she and I both serve on the board for the Literacy Academy Collective. We have a mayoral election coming up in the great city of New York, and I think the conversation that really needs to happen is one about literacy. And we think this is such a critical element of the upcoming administration. And we just want to make sure that we do everything in our power to recenter the conversation about the children and families in New York City and helping the incredibly large and complex DOE get exactly what they need out of the next leader here. So I'm excited about the conversation. I hope you'll enjoy it. And thanks so much for tuning in. Our goal is to kind of not talk about the mayoral race itself in terms of the politics of that, but really to think about recentering the conversation back to a point around literacy. Meisha, you and I had such a great opportunity a little bit earlier in the year as the mayoral race and the primaries were kind of getting really kicked off. Talk about, we hosted an educational focused mayoral town hall, which we invited candidates in to talk about their platforms and their alignment with NYC Reads and the commitment there. And then what happened is the mayoral race has sort of taken on a life of its own, and education has really taken a massive step back in the dialogue here. So our goal today is make a real effort here to try and elevate the dialogue around literacy. And Bobby, if you would maybe sort of talk a little bit about why this is such an important sort of piece for you, because I think you have such a great intersection of advocacy work, your love of literacy, your desire to help more students with dyslexia be successful adults in their life. And, you've had an undying support for Windward in our work. So maybe just talk a little bit about sort of why this is such an important moment right now in the mayoral race.
Sure. Thank you so much, Jamie, for having me on. And, the reason I care about it, of course, is because it happened to me. I remember being 6 years old at PS 230 in Kensington, Brooklyn, struggling so much to read just even the simplest of text. And I was so lucky that I had a teacher who suspected that I had dyslexia. I got lucky again because my parents had the means and the opportunity to get me a neuropsychological exam that confirmed their suspicions. And I got lucky a third time. I was able in the middle of second grade to first go to the Gateway School, which is another great school that specializes in educating children with dyslexia. And then for middle school, I went to Windward. But no kid should have to be lucky to learn how to read. And that's happening with way too many of our kids. I have been so proud to be able to partner with you, Jamie, with you, Meisha, and with so many other like-minded leaders in this space to say we can do so much better for all of our children, and all of our children can be successful readers. What's been frustrating is though we've made some gains with New York City Reads, and a lot of us were there at the very beginning of that, it is not a job done. There is so much more to accomplish. And of course, whomever the next mayor and chancellor are, they're going to have full control over our schools and over the trajectory of how those schools prioritize certain things. I hope, and I think we all hope, that they're going to prioritize evidence-based literacy. And I especially hope, because we really haven't seen any movement, that they're going to prioritize and drill down how we can reach children struggling with dyslexia and other language-based learning disabilities, because really, it is still 1993. That's when I was first diagnosed. If your son or daughter is struggling with dyslexia or language-based learning disability, of which that's what 70, 80% of the kids labeled as having a learning disability really are struggling with, they still are not getting the mandated services that they're entitled to. And that's shutting them out to so much opportunity in our schools and, of course, into the greater world. And we need to solve that. And that's something we can solve in New York City. There are other things we can't solve in New York City, even if we really want to. But we can solve this. We can make sure every kid can read.
Yeah, I so appreciate that. And, and Meisha, as you think about your sort of journey as an educator, as a leader in this space, I'd love to get your thoughts on this topic as well. Like, why do you think this is such an important thing to kind of bring forward into this conversation right now?
Well, I think, post pandemic, right? Like we were hyper focused on getting kids back to in-person learning, right? So the first step was like, we just got to get our babies back in school. And I think we were all really excited from the spaces the three of us sit in, on this focus on dyslexia in particular in the administration that came in. And there have been some really amazing highlights. Jamie and I, we get to sit on the board of the Literacy Academy Collective, but there are two schools now. Two
Yeah.
schools in New York City that are focused on dyslexia. I think we're at a really important moment where I think for the first time, advocates, parents, teachers, leaders, electeds are aligned in what we want for New York City public education. We want to double down, focus on literacy. We want evidence-based practices. We want teacher development. And usually when we are talking about a transition of leadership, we're talking about who's going to be in what seat and what the structural change is going to be for that system. For the first time, we're having a conversation about literacy and a common set of practices. And I think that's what's so important about this moment. When we talk about listening to parents, listening to communities, listening to advocates, here's the moment we're all saying the same thing.
And I so appreciate that. And I think you're absolutely right. This is my 20th-ish year in education, maybe 22-ish. And I think for the first time, I think what we're seeing is really, less conversation about the reading wars and should we be doing this, the approach or that approach, but we have some alignment. We have, I think, a lot of families who have educated themselves to an incredible degree and are demanding change in a really, really important space. New York City is the largest, most complex school district or school districts, collection of school districts, the DOE, in the country. And I think if we can get this right here, I think that we can get this right anywhere. And I so appreciate the passion that the two of you bring. And also, I just want to we do have these two schools that are the LAC is supporting in Central Brooklyn and then South Bronx. That's about 140, 150 kids out of like the 900,000 that the DOE serves every day who are actually getting good work. And so we just want to make sure that as we think about the work that's happening in the DOE, that we kind of elevate, we kind of provide some direction. And my hope is that whatever chancellor they appoint in this process can really, I think, respect the work that's happened, respect the foundation, listen to our kids and families and the needs there. But I do think that, when we think about New York City, I sometimes, there's so many ways to think about this, but it almost feels like we have, kind of this reading, this literacy work here, what needs to be front and center of all we do. If New York is going to do this work, and we're going to really kind of push this work forward, I think it's going to take so many stakeholders at the table pulling all in the same direction. And I so appreciate, Bobby, you've talked about this a number of times with me. The machine of the DOE, right? When you get and align that machine, so many great things can happen because there's so much that system can do. But when it's malaligned, I think it just spends time just grinding the gears, right? And we want to make sure that whoever comes in from a chancellor perspective can really elevate that work, get the system working in some harmony, provide some great training support for our teachers, our administrators, and then some great support for kids down the road here. So when we think about New York City's reading crisis, what does this reveal about some greater systemic challenges that the New York City is facing as a whole? And what are some of the realities about kind of charting this path forward that we need to really be considering?
Well, I think one of the things you hit on, right, the scope of the system, right, it's immense. And one of the problems prior to David Banks, who deserves unbelievable credit for really breaking the glass ceiling and deciding to prioritize literacy like no other chancellor had done before him, is that we can't go back to the old way, right? We need to prioritize literacy, right? So we need to prioritize it for tier 1 supports, for gen ed. We also need to prioritize it for children who are struggling to learn to read and making sure that we're identifying those kids so we know why they're struggling to learn to read. But what we can't have happen, right, is go back to an old system where we say, hey, there's 32 districts, 5 boroughs, dealer's choice. You guys figure it out. That's going to be what we're going to do. We need to make sure that whatever the leadership structure looks like at DOE and at City Hall is that everybody is, as you said, pulling in the right direction. Say that literacy. I believe in progressive education. I think everyone here does. But as a person who has dyslexia, right, I could not have made the choices I made in high school, college, law school, if I wasn't a strong reader and writer. You can make progressive choices. You can go discover the things that interest you, that, speak to your background, that speak to your talents, but you can't do that if you can't read. And that's why we need a chancellor, and we need whomever the structure around that chancellor is to say, this is job one. We need to do it. We need to, be laser focused on it, because the system is immense. And and Meisha knows better than all of us, right? We've got 150,000 kids who experience homeless every year. We've got, at least 150 languages spoken at home, maybe more. We've got kids who are facing unbelievable adversity and trauma. And so we've got to solve those problems. But if we don't prioritize literacy, I think then those other problems get exacerbated, because that's the reason why those kids say, you know what, I am smart and clever, but this doesn't work for me, so I'm not coming back. Or, this is, something I hate, or this is something that I don't want to participate in a meaningful way. And so I think it helps us solve issues of truancy. It helps us solve issues of bad social behaviors. And so, it's something that, we need to be focused on, because there are a lot of fires to put out at DOE always. But if you don't put this as one of your top, it unfortunately, I think, goes all the way to the bottom. And so that's where we need to make sure that leadership team understands that.
Yeah,
absolutely.
Yeah. So I just add to that and say that, we need to ensure that in New York City that we have every child has a pathway to be a confident reader by the end of third grade, and every educator is equipped to get them there. And so part of it is going to be, a big part of this is about, we have a pathway. What does it mean to support teachers? Right. We have a big teacher pipeline issue, right? We know we have a teacher gap. How are we working with institutions of higher ed to prioritize, teacher prep programs? We got to get teachers in the door ready to go, and we got to have ongoing support that is part of our system. And we got to have great partners like you, Jamie, and the Windward School, and other partners that are local and immediate and have expertise in this area. We got to get your teachers talking to our teachers. Yeah. We have to build deep relationships that center literacy across this city as a collective. And it's got to go outside of school. We got to bring in our nonprofit partners. We have to bring in our business owners. We have to, the same way we look at, career connected learning is the same way we should look at literacy across this city, that every single person in the city is part of building a more literate New York City.
Yeah,
could not agree more. And we could do so much more. My office, we're doing a grant for structured literacy and decodable text with the Brooklyn Public Library next month. We could put our libraries, we could bring our pediatricians in on this. We could bring our family court in on this, right? If we're focused on it to say we're going to solve this for kids, we can do that. And we have the expertise. And I'm going to give a shout out to Windward here. One of the things that makes me go nuts, right? We do lots of literacy grants for local schools in my district all the time, is that, sometimes we're sending people hundreds of miles away from New York City when it's not just Windward. Windward's one of the best, but we've got a bunch of great schools and great experts, both in the primary school space and in the secondary school space, that are ready to help. And why, when somebody just needs to get on the subway, are we sending teachers and administrators down I-95? That's not a knock to anybody else, but it's crazy to think, we've got people driving hours and hours away or taking courses online when they could do them live and in person in New York City with great experts. We need to do that. I couldn't agree more. And I there's a few points that we talked about today that you've already brought up that I think are so important. And when we think about, this administration and really the act of leading change, because really this is whoever comes into this role as a chancellor is going to really have to think about where the DOE currently stands. What are the priorities that are in that, because we've talked about early intervention, teacher preparation, curriculum quality, stronger accountability. more access to professional development funds, all those things, and so as you think about, and maybe this question is first for Meisha, because I think she has sat in a space where she's been, at the helm here, trying to think about how to kind of get this engine started. What should the top priorities be from the next chancellor's office here and that entire administration? Where should they start the focus at?
Yeah. I mean, I think one of the conversations that I got a opportunity to be part of was let's start with what's working well for the first time, right? Let's enter this space. We talk about innovation and innovative practices. Innovation is really about identifying what works well and doubling down and improving upon that. And so I think the first thing is really understand what's happening, what's going well, what's working well, what's producing outcomes. As a first step. I think the next step is really thinking about, how are we targeting those? The 20% of our system is a English language learner, is a low reader, is a student identified as having a disability, right? And so how are we supporting the 20% of our system that receives the least support and the least resources? And so I think looking for it to identifying what works well, doubling down and lifting up those practices. And then I think too, really looking at the 20%. That's what this conversation about literate starts really. Like it really starts with thinking about where aren't we having the greatest impact? Where aren't we, sowing our priorities as a system? And how can we reprioritize resources so it's getting to the places of greatest need? I always say you can have the greatest impact when you go to the places of greatest need. And we need to do that in education.
Just to add a cherry on top of that, Meisha, I think the one thing, though, that we need from DOE to understand is that, for issues like dyslexia and other language-based learning disabilities, they magically aren't fixed in 6 months, right? I always like to remind folks that I was a pretty clever 6-year-old. And in the middle of second grade, I went to the Gateway School, and I was in schools that specialized in teaching and remediating dyslexia until the 8th grade, right? And then I went to, for whatever you want, for lack of a better term, a mainstream school. I don't love that binary, but I think we have to be clear. If we have students who are struggling with language-based learning disabilities, this is not a 6-month intervention, right?
That's right.
This is a multi-year intervention, and that is different than a child who might be an English language learner, but is very phonologically aware. That child with the right tier 1 interventions is going to start flourishing significantly quicker, right? They're going to suddenly go and say, just a second, I get this. And they're going to take off, which is why tier 1 supports are so important, right? When we didn't have good tier 1 curriculum, the problem is we had kids where they were English language learners and they weren't making up ground. And you go, why is this happening? And part of it was that tier 1 curriculum wasn't rooted in evidence-based practices.
Right.
So I think that will also help if we continue this focus. It will help us be able to really narrow down on those kids who need the most intensive interventions.
Yeah.
And I'm so glad you brought that up, Bob, because I think one of the things is we've talked about some of the screening efforts that happen, not just in New York City, but across the country. If you're screening kids in a system that does not have the foundational kind of evidence-based curriculum to support learners,
right,
what you're going to see is like you're going to over-identify kids who are probably not in your actually dyslexia camp or actual reading disorder or reading disability camp, but kids who just haven't received good instruction.
Yeah.
And I would put our ELL learners in that space. Yeah. There are a lot of those kids who get misidentified and routed into a space because that's where some service is at, but not actually the service that child really, truly needs. And so this idea of building out a kind of a base level kind of tier 1, everybody gets really solid instruction day 1 and I so appreciate, Bobby, not just 6 months. This is like from kindergarten through 12th grade, right? They need to be having deep, like evidence-based material in front of them. And when you do that, then you see that 10, 15% or up to 20% sometimes of kids who really are struggling and who need the intensive intervention. Otherwise, your system gets flooded. And so I really appreciate that you both had sort of touched down on that a little bit. And I'm also going to sort of pick on this idea of building on what's been working, Meisha, because I think you're absolutely right. Like there have been some good things happen over the last year. We've had a chancellor's office, and I really appreciate your credit to David Banks in this work. I think he came in, I think it was his second day as chancellor, if not his first day. His first stop was Windward, right? He wanted to see.
I think I was the guy who made me brought here.
You were very big on that.
Give credit where credit is due, Jamie.
Yeah, and he walked in, and I remember him walking in, and the first thing he said is, like, you don't need to sell me. I know this is one of the best schools in the country for what you do, and I'm here to learn. So show me what you do.
Yeah.
So it wasn't about convincing him that this was what's right. As an educator, he knew what we needed to be doing. And I really appreciate his focus on there. But a lot of the meetings we had with a lot of the upper sort of echelon of the DOE was that we don't quite know what to do with these kids. We've been doing some curriculum that's clearly not working, and we have a lot of local control in the districts that the DOE sort of oversees and at the building level, and we need to figure out how to kind of knit those things together. So one of the things that I think has been working fairly well, or that probably could be built upon, is this idea of the NYC Reads Plan. So talk about, maybe if you either of you could talk about what are some things we should build on within the NYC Reads Plan, or even change. Because I remember when we asked the question at the mayoral town hall, the educational focused one was about, like, do you support this? And it was overwhelming in the group. I think it was everybody who that we talked to deeply supported this as an initiative and wanted to extend and build on that work. So what should we build on from that perspective, or what should we change?
Yeah. So, I mean, I would just offer a couple of things. I think we should absolutely build on ensuring that the curriculum is implemented with fidelity. And so that means regular support and coaching of teachers and with teachers. That means continuing to ensure that we're building principals as literacy leaders across this city, right? And so how are we investing in the development of teachers, building some model schools, continuing to build on what works? But I think also, what does it mean to invest in people outside of our classrooms, our nonprofit partners, our families and teachers, our teachers at home, right? How are we ensuring that they have tools at home to support build literacy? And I think the only other thing I would add in terms of expansion is, how do we go down? How do we get closer to birth? How do we start having earlier conversations? And so my dream is that we start from birth, partnering with hospital systems, getting babies out with literacy packages, heading home with their families, and we start building those tools from the second our families walk out of the hospital. And I think the school systems and the hospital systems can come together to figure out what that means and what that looks like.
100%. And I'm so glad you brought up the concept of fidelity and integrity of program. Right. Again, over 20 years, I've heard so many schools, well, we bought this program, didn't work. My first question is, did you train everybody? Did you actually implement it with any kind of consistency and fidelity, or something that looked like integrity? And the answer, I feel like 90+% of the time, is no. Yeah. They hoped that there was going to be some magic thing that came with the book that was just going to sort of disseminate itself, but it doesn't. And without some really clear systems in place to not only train, but also monitor that work, you're in for a long road. And what you invested in is not going to be effective. I also appreciate, because I think we both led school buildings in our career, and it's one of my favorite jobs as I have sort of moved in my career. I loved leading a building, and I loved being that instructional leader for my campus. It was one of those things that I took so much love and pride in. And I think without building the leadership capacity within those schools to understand, the principal doesn't need to be able to teach the bossy R or the magic or the silent E, but what they do need to understand is, what are the core tenets of the science of reading, and how am I supporting my teachers in doing something that's effective? And again, when it comes to like parents and partners in the community and parents, this idea of helping families when they have children, create a language-rich environment that helps kids build strong background knowledge, because we know the research has shown us that building that background knowledge over time actually helps deepen understanding and comprehension later on, and developing vocabulary. But I do think we have to think about this as a kind of a birth through K or birth through 12 experience for kids. So thank you so much for that. And Bobby, I don't know if you had anything else on the NYC reads that you think we should be building on or changing.
Well, look, I agree that, fidelity is important. But I would also say that as much credit, and David Banks deserves a ton of credit, and I sat on his literacy advisory council for the first 3 years of it. It is not fully implemented. There are whole language curriculums going on. We're speaking at 10:30 in the morning right now. There are, Fontes and Pinnell and Lucy Calkins readers being used right now. And so this is the issue with a big school system, right? The one thing that a smaller school system, whether it's an independent school or a small school district, is you can wrap your hands right around it. That is much harder to do in New York City. And so we need somebody to realize that they have to be laser focused on saying we need to eliminate these materials and make sure that we are using the materials that are evidence-based, that are structured, that are decodable, so that our children become strong readers. And I think we also need to be honest with parents. Right? The problem, I don't want to, not here to attack anyone, but the problem with the current chancellor is that she is so loose with her words. She is not clear with what's going on in the system right now. She went on a major political podcast and said that we were screening every child for dyslexia. My office wrote her a letter. She didn't respond for a week. We published the letter. She finally responded. That's not to say bully me. But what it is to say is when you have parents, and what I deal with, look, I'm an advocate. I have parents from around New York City come to my office every week because of my story. When they hear the most important education leader in the state say, we're doing it, mom goes, okay. Sarah's going to get, she says they're screening them. They say they're going to tell me, right? I mean, that's the reason why we're such big proponents in my office for statewide mandates for evidence-based curriculum. That's why we're a huge proponent. We have the bill, the Right to Read bill, which does that. We also have the New York Individuals with Dyslexia Education Act, which would require not just screening, but to tell people about screening and to then build a plan to say, look, this is what we are going to do. Right now, we don't do that, right? One of even the issues with screening, right? And I was, we fund a different program in low-income schools called the Promise Project, which is a phenomenal organization. I was on a tour at PS 124, which 50% of the children are homeless there because it's between two homeless shelters in my district. 16 of the 48 kids in kindergarten were screened as at risk. I asked, I said, so, okay, how many of them are we going to get neuropsychs for? Right. And we passed the bill. Mine was first in the nation bill to, along with Senator Hoylman, to provide, require insurance to cover neuropsychs. Zero. I said, well, these kids, they might be in the Bronx next month. They might be in Queens. If they don't have a neuropsych, they don't have any legal standing here. And I said, look, I have dyslexia. This is not, there is no way to prevent that. That is the anatomy of my brain is different. It is a neurobiological disorder. Now, because of the plasticity of the brain, because of the amazing things that interventions require, you can have other structures of the brain take over what normally would be where somebody, stores and maps the phonology of a language. But, this is obviously a gigantic issue, but it is why we must prioritize it. My life would be completely different if literacy was not prioritized in grades 2 through 8 for me. I would not have been able to do the things I was able to do. And I want kids, look, there are certain things. I'm never going to learn Spanish or French or Russian or Chinese. Impossible. I'm not going to win a speed reading contest or a spelling bee. But I am able to be a successful student and thus adult.
Yeah.
I'm able to go and figure out where I have talent and where I have skill, and I'm able to double down on that. We're stopping kids. And the problem is, I think too often in our lower grades, we want to pretend that 5-year-olds are 25-year-olds. And 5-year-olds learning how to read is difficult for all of them.
Yeah.
It's a new skill. For some of them, much more than others. And when they're 15, though, we want them to go and say, you know what? I'm great at mechanical things. I want to study physics. I want to study calculus. Or I'm great at English language arts. I want to double down on English literature or theater or history and everything in between. But we're not doing that because I think too often, and Meisha, I'm sure you can talk about this better. Look, I have 2 little kids. I worry about them a lot. We want to expose them to all types of things. But if we don't give them those foundational skills early, all of that good intention of exposing them to things is for naught. And that's what I fear, in the system, is that we don't realize that this early intensive focus on this is going to open up such opportunity and such progressive choices. I remember, and I'll stop, I know I'm filibustering. I was really upset, when I first went to the Gateway School, right? I grew up in Brooklyn before Brooklyn was cool. And I was going to this very little school on the Upper East Side of Manhattan, one of 2 kids from Brooklyn, and felt completely segregated and terrible about myself. And I don't want that to happen to anybody, which is why we need to solve this issue in the public schools. But my father said something to me. He said, everybody is going to have to work hard and struggle in life. You're just going to have to do it much sooner. And it was a very big thing to say to a 7-year-old, but it stuck with me. And what then allowed me, though, those struggles then allowed me to have so much potential later on. And every one of our kids, all 900,000 of them, have deep potential. That's another thing that David Banks was great at. He believed in the excellence and the potential of every one of those kids. We need an educator like that. This cannot be the soft bigotry of low expectations that you've got dyslexia or you're from a low-income family. We lower the bar for you.
Yeah. Well, listen, it's a big system, but I think that the one thing that is most important is that whomever leads the system has to recognize the most important thing that happens in New York City public schools happens in classrooms between teachers and students. And there is a lot of space between Tweed and a school building. We need to cut in between that space. We have amazing superintendents who are leading the literacy work across the city. We need to localize that support and not think it operates from central office, because it actually operates locally. So looking forward to what's to come in this city.
Yeah. And I think we've talked around this a little bit, and I so appreciate your sort of your journey here, Bobby. But I'm thinking about, for every story like that I get to hear, and the great privilege that I have in my work, and sort of seeing kids who've been remediated and have just such access to great instruction. There are like 20, 30, 40 kids who are fully in the pipeline from school to prison, who will not get what they need, who will find themselves in low expectations in a space where they don't get the support they need, and end up in lots and lots of different areas. And it rarely turns out well for those kids. And so, that's why I think this is such an important piece on, like, not just an educational, but also societal sort of space here. Like, New York City can be better. I didn't grow up here. I didn't have the good fortune of being a Brooklynite before Brooklyn was cool, or Manhattan. But I do believe in this city so much. I believe in everything that we have the potential here to do. And I think if we can get this right in the context of the DOE and the New York City school system, like, talk about being a lighthouse and a beacon for folks across the country. Like, this is what I think we have the responsibility and the need to do. So, Meisha, as you think about sort of what experiences this next chancellor should bring in order to really lead the largest and most complex school district in the country, if not maybe even the world, who knows, right? This is like such a big organization. What skills does this chancellor need in order to make literacy improvement truly a citywide effort?
Well, first of all, they need to prioritize literacy, be very clear that this city and the advocates and the educators and the electeds beyond have been very vocal about what our priority is for moving the city forward. And that's doubling down on NYC Reads, that's deepening practices. And so I would say the first thing is to come in with that as a clear priority. I think Bobby raised it in terms of like thinking about who's led in this city before, recognizing there's brilliance across the city, across 900,000 plus students, and think about how you celebrate, elevate, and activate that brilliance across every school. And at the end of the day, every student in every school building across every zip code in New York City deserves a high quality education. And so how are you going to deepen the strong literacy practices that we talked about across New York City public schools? And how are you going to support teachers and build a strong pathway and pipeline to this profession? Make New York City the place people want to come teach and learn. So
yeah. I love that. I love that. And Bobby, from your vantage point, because I just want to like take a moment here to kind of recognize that you have been such a champion for our kids legislatively. You know, you have pushed on so many bills that are education focused, dyslexia focused, screening focused, and neuropsych, access focused. So from where you sit today and where we have moved, like what real policy or legislative actions are most needed in order to make literacy reform effective and I would say, dare say, equitable across our city in a very sustainable manner? Like, what do you?
Well, so the great question. I think there are kind of two pillars to that. One is leadership that Meisha was talking about, right? We need great education leaders running our public schools, and there are a lot of great ones, right? And then we need legislative support. One of the reasons I am a big proponent of and carry the bills that require evidence-based literacy curriculum mandates, require reading specialists and teachers in all of our schools, make requirements of local school districts, is because we cannot just kind of play roulette with our school systems every 4, 8, 12 years and say, well, look, it's always at the end of the day, whomever the mayor is, or whomever the county executive is, or whoever the superintendent is. That's unfair to teachers. It's unfair to students. It's unfair to families. So we need to pass legislation that other states, both blue and red states, have passed that require evidence-based curriculum, evidence-based professional development. It is pro-teacher and teacher focused. My mom was a New York City public school teacher. She taught reading at PS 372, the children's school, which was a unique model of a District 15 and District 75 school together that was very successful. She did that because of my struggles and wanted to give back because of how lucky we were. So teachers want this, right? Teachers, principals, they are, dying of thirst, right? They want the leadership. But what we can't have is it be schizophrenic, where people feel like, new mayor, new chancellor, new script. And that's why we need those statewide reforms. If California, which is just like us, right? Just like New York in so many ways, can finally pass evidence-based mandates and get them signed into law, New York can do that. Those two bills that I care about, I carry them. It's the Right to Read Act and it's the New York Individuals with Dyslexia Education Act. So we cover both our Tier 1 students and our Tier 3 students. And we could do that this year, and we would love anyone who's listening for their support and to reach out to their state assembly member and their state senator and whomever else, because we need to do that, because this is an issue of justice. You cannot claim that you are a progressive, that you are a person who cares about people being able to rise up if you don't care about them learning how to read. And you said it. Look, the school to prison pipeline is somewhat well known. What I don't think is nearly as well known is, 52% of the adults in the city of Philadelphia can't read. That's That is astounding. That a great American city, half the that means they can't go to the doctor. That means they can't interact, with society writ large. Can't go get a driver's license, right? We know people, because we're in this space, where you have to help them fill out forms, right? But so many of those people, they opt out of society. And you go, why doesn't Billy have a driver's license? Why didn't Chuck go to the doctor? Why can't, he's a great carpenter, or why can't he hold a job? Because he can't read.
Yeah.
And I think we have done so many kids an absolute disservice. And curricularly, let's not even talk about the instructional, but like curricularly, so I'm not trying to blame teachers in this, because I do think teachers have been doing the best they can with the tools and strategies that they have in front of them. And I think we have put some things into the system that are deeply ineffective. And now we have to extract those in the process of bringing some better work into the fold here.
Yeah. And I have to tell you, Jamie, I, as a former teacher, principal who worked in through empowerment, I totally agree with Bobby. Folks want a starting point. They want to know that starting point is the right starting point. They do not want to try to figure it out on somebody's baby. And so giving teachers a guide, a pathway that they know is evidence-based, that they know is rooted in science, that they know is research-based, gives them a starting point to ensure that, we do what school is meant to do. If students aren't literate, then they are blocked from realizing their potential, not only in the schoolhouse, but in their adult life and beyond.
Yeah, could not agree more. I think we've had this conversation a few times. I'm a deeply optimistic human being. I like to live in the land of hope, live in the land of possibility. And I believe, I'm a big fan of the Stocksdale paradox, right? Like, you got to confront the brutal facts of a situation, but you have to believe that in the end, you're going to prevail. And I have, that's just been an ethos of mine that I have been since I was a child, it feels like. And once I learned that paradox, it was like, this fits me so incredibly well. So we got two kind of maybe final questions we're going to end on here. But one is, what's something right now that makes you hopeful about the future of literacy in New York?
Well, I'll PS 107 in Park Slope, Brooklyn. We did a series of videos earlier this month that highlighted the work they've done, and we changed the trajectory of reading attainment for all students with disabilities and students without. And, the leadership there, the courageous leadership there, right? Before New York City Read started, we did literacy grants there. And that was a school that was fully bought in, to whole language curriculums. The teachers, the principal had all gone through Lucy Calkins at, Teachers College. And they realized they had an epiphany. And now they have the zeal of the converted. And I think that, what's going to happen is, because facts are stubborn, what we're going to see is that so many more people are going to have the zeal of the converted, that they're going to say, this is amazing. And I know fully well what it feels like to not just feel stupid, but to feel inadequate, and to think adults are looking at you and making you say, this person is less than, this person is not capable of what other students are. And I understand as a white man from a privileged neighborhood that there's a whole host of other students who feel that way for different reasons.
Yeah.
And that when we unlock this, when we show that these kids have deep and great potential, I think the sky is the limit. I think we're going to have teachers, principals, superintendents. It's already started, saying, just a second, we can hit this ball, and we can hit it really far. And that's what I'm excited about.
Well, I'm gonna say PS 111 in the Bronx. I ran into the principal at the car dealership, and she was a principal who I got the opportunity to select, and she had just finished her 5th year. and she was just talking to the power of NYC Reads. And I wanted to say another school because this is a school by school. It's important to know what's happening school by school. And when I ran into the principal, she was so proud of significant double-digit gains that community had not seen. And she was able to point to exactly how, where, and why it happened. And so that's what people want. They want to know. They want a magic bullet. They know it's not going to be magical. They know it's going to be beginning magic, but they want to know that there's a starting point that's headed towards a win. So shout out to PS 111 and District 11 in the Bronx for the deep work that they're doing and the pride with which they're doing it.
Thank you. And I think it's the thing that I'm most hopeful about. And again, not knowing, I'm so glad you two have some really good schools that are seeing some schools doing some great work. I do want to lift up, Ruth Gann, who's been running the LAC in the South Bronx Literacy Academy, the Central Brooklyn Literacy Academy. Ruth and her team, Emily Hellstrom, Ilya Edwards, and Naomi Pena have just been doing, these are fierce advocates of this work who have been mobilizing, working, and pushing. And just the leadership that they have, the inspiration they are to others. I am just so proud to know them, and so proud to have been supporting that effort for the last 6-7 years. And so I'm just, that makes me hopeful in such a big way. As we think about this the next mayor of New York City. I know that the folks are coming to a vote next Tuesday. I'm hopeful that we're gonna have a real big celebration in that space. I hope this is the mayor that we need of the moment here, and the people will have a chance to speak into that. Mm-hmm. But if there's one message that you could deliver to the next mayor and the chancellor of the DOE, what would that message be to ensure that they really prioritize this?
Well, I'll start. We've heard a lot of talk about affordability across New York City. And I want to say education is deeply linked to affordability, and not just affordability, but thrivability. We want teachers who can afford to live and work in New York City, and so they're not priced out of classrooms. And we want children who have all the resources that they need to get a high quality education. And so as we think forward about how we build a stronger, more equitable, more affordable New York City, educational equity is at the heart and core of that. And literacy is the driver.
Mm-hmm. Thank you.
Couldn't have said it better myself, Meisha. Education is linked to affordability. If you want to make a more equitable society, you have to make a society that is literate, and we're failing at that job right now. And I think also as a progressive Democrat, I think one of the things that we must be focused on that sometimes we are not is that building skills for children is progressive education policy. We want to focus sometimes on way too many other things, and maybe for higher grades, that's the way to go. But skills building is progressive education policy. I work with a bunch of other schools that also work with children with dyslexia, and their report cards. I forget what the Windward report card goes, but I was looking at the Gateway report card just the other day, and it's just skills. It's the skills that the children need to attain, because these parents and these teachers and these schools are laser focused on that. And so I would love to have a conversation about skills. And of course, I think it's pretty clear that we think the most important skill is fluid and fluent reading, but that includes math, that includes social, emotional things. Let's build those skills, and we're going to build a much more equitable city, because it's going to unlock the potential of 1 million, almost 1 million New York City public school kids, the vast majority of which come from disadvantaged backgrounds, right? What could be more progressive than that?
Completely agree. And I so appreciate this conversation today. Every time I get in a conversation with you, Meisha, I hear your passion, I hear your energy, I hear your community focus, and it just really fills my heart. Bobby, you have been such an advocate for our kids and families, both in the public sort of elected space, at the legislative space, but also on a personal level. You are out there in the community trying to find resources for schools, trying to connect kids to service. And it makes me, I feel like lucky and honored to be able to sit down and have a conversation with the two of you anytime I get a chance. So thank you so much for being on the Read podcast today. I feel so lucky that you are on our side and that you are so deeply supportive of the kids and families of New York City. Our community and our city is better for the two of you being in it. And it just makes me really proud to be part of this great work. So thank you both for that.
Well, thank you, Jamie. Always a pleasure.
Thank you. Thank you, Jamie. It's wonderful to be here. Windward changed my life.
And I think that you have given back 100-fold in that, Bobby. So thank you. Just as maybe just a big message, because we have readers or listeners from across, as we jokingly call our listeners readers, right? The Read podcast. We have folks across, the country and actually internationally who listen to this podcast. We've eclipsed 100,000 downloads for this. But I'm going to just put a special message on the end here. If you are a New York City family residing in one of the 5 boroughs, reach out, have your voice be heard, reach out to your local representatives, city council, your assemblymen, your senators, and push on this conversation, because I do think New York deserves to be at the forefront of this conversation. We are, I think that if we can do this here, I think we can do this anywhere. And that gives me such hope and optimism for the future. But reach out, check in with folks, and let's make literacy a big part of this mayoral conversation and the new chancellor's work. So thank you both. And I just so appreciate you being here.